I'm Piers, I'm from Diversity and Ability. Today I'm joined by another wonderful individual. Please, would you introduce yourself, your role and your background slightly, and how you sort of got involved in championing disability inclusion?
Thank you for having me today, Piers. My name is Cherina Darrell. I'm the Regional Diversity, Inclusion and Participation Manager for the East of England in HEE. I joined the organization in November last year, and before that I worked at King's College University at the Faculty of Life Science and Medicine. I work quite closely with clinical academics, clinical researchers, as well as students on addressing development issues, but mainly around perceptions around diversity and inclusion, and progressing individuals from underrepresented backgrounds through the sort of research career lifestyle, and the sort of challenges that are faced at those barriers, mainly around the difficulty or barriers between going from a postgraduate researcher to actually getting into research, because there seems to be a lack of people from BAME backgrounds going into research. So that was something that we really were quite focused on. I've always been interested in healthcare inequalities. It's something I'm very passionate about, specifically because of the health inequalities faced by a lot of Black women, specifically Black women with disabilities and Black men as it relates to mental health, something I'm sure we'll touch on today. And I got into diversity and inclusion through working at a students' union and being a student. I used to work with a lot of students with disabilities. I was like a special assistant where I would support certain students with things like laundry, going to the grocery store, and helping them and supporting them with the social life, because that was a real challenge for a lot of students, and just sort of coaching them and giving them this kind of confidence that they needed to be able to kind of just go out there and do that. So yeah, that's sort of how I kind of got here.
You mentioned about attitudinal barriers, and we know from the multitude of surveys that have gone out, disabled people highlight attitudinal barriers as the most common barrier that we experience. So given your wonderful introduction where you touched on it slightly, would you be able to go into that a little bit more about the sort of perceptions of and the attitudinal issues that you mentioned in your wonderful introduction?
It's sort of like a two-way attitudes and perceptions. So it's the attitudes and perceptions of someone that has a disability, and the attitudes and perceptions of people who don't. And they intersect. It took me a really long time to sort of say out loud that I had a disability. I have to be honest, I didn't want to feel that people pitied me. And coming from a Caribbean background where asking for help is not something that you normally do, no matter what you're going through, it really took me a long time to sort of be like, yeah, I do have I have disabilities, and that is okay. So just the level of acceptance and saying it was a challenge for me personally. But then when I started to sort of notice that people treated me a bit differently, excluded me sometimes, it made me kind of go back inside myself and say, okay, I'm not even going to declare that I have a disability anymore. And even though I know that my disability data was protected, it still made me feel as though I shouldn't declare. And I think that's a common problem across a lot of organizations, but particularly in the NHS. On the other side of that is people who don't have disabilities, perceptions and attitudes. I do have to put a lot of it down to ignorance. It's if you don't know what you don't know, that is, we say that all the time, you don't know what you don't know, but it's also the way that you communicate when you don't know something, the little comments that people make, they build up over time. And I know we're going to touch on microaggressions later, but they build up over time. So it makes someone with a disability feel like, you know what, maybe I just need to withdraw myself from this space socially or otherwise. There is a lack of understanding, particularly around those who manage people that have disabilities on and support for them really on how and what the best approach is. And I do think that's something that we, as not just society, but all organizations, we need to do a better job at. It's how do we equip our managers, our people managers, to be able to support and address issues as it relates to staff with disabilities so that they don't feel uncomfortable in the workforce. Because if you do have a disability, and you have other people in your friendship circle or family circle that have disabilities, and they're listening to you talk about your experiences, your negative experiences at work, it I could imagine that that might make you feel like, do I even want to enter, not the workforce, but do I want to work at this place if I know that my friend or my family member is having this kind of experience? And I think it's just a vicious, unfortunate and vicious cycle that just repeats itself and goes around. So I think when we're talking about attitudes and perceptions, we talk about people that don't have disabilities, but we also have to talk about our own attitudes and perceptions. Not to say anything was wrong with us, but it's just, you have to think about it from the inside out as well. I think what would have benefited me, especially in when I first started working, when I first graduated from uni, was a lot of like some coaching from someone who was more senior than me that had disabilities, and helping me to sort of overcome those psychological barriers that I had already, because of the fact that I had disabilities, but also because I'm a person of color as well. And that very much intersects in so many different ways.
I agree with so much of that. When we talk about perceptions, it can also be perceptions that someone has that you didn't intend. If you didn't say what your accessibility information was, the perception is you aren't accessible, even if you've invested heavily. So onto, as you've mentioned, we're going to come on to talk roughly about microaggressions and with the intersections between race and disability in particular. In terms of your own experiences or in your professional work, would you be able to expand a little on sort of the intersection between race and disability and touch on that microaggression aspect that you so eloquently introduced earlier?
I'll tell you my earliest, I'll just tell you my sort of earliest experience that stuck out the most, that I think was the most traumatizing. When I was in high school, so I grew up in Bermuda. So when I was in high school, because of the issues that I had with my hip, and the ongoing challenges that I had, they were a lot worse when I was younger. I was excluded from a lot of physical activities without really asking me. And I kind of just grew to accept that. But one year we went to see Barack Obama's inauguration in Washington, D.C., right? So we had to walk all the way from Arlington, Virginia to D.C. And because of my hip, it was like a 13-mile walk. It was very long. It was like 17 degrees outside. It was challenging, I'm not gonna lie, but I pushed through. My feet were killing me. My hip did hurt, but I really wanted to see it. And then we had to walk all the way back. Didn't think anything of it. Great experience. I would have done it all over again. I got back to school and they put a whole assembly on for me to give me an award for being so brave, for pushing through my pain. And I felt so uncomfortable, but I couldn't put into words, and I didn't really understand why I felt uncomfortable, but I just, I smiled and accepted the award. And, my mom was like, she thought it was weird too, but, I didn't think anything of it. And it sort of speaks to what you kind of mentioned around being seen as this courageous individual. It's like, no, I'm just living my life, and I want to live my life just the same way that you do, When we talk about where the intersections with race come in, I often think that it shifts often to the mental disability side of things. I think, I'll give you an example. I have anxiety disorder. And I was very easily dismissed in my first role working in the UK as someone that had a very bad attitude. It was just so easy to push me as being aggressive. I had an attitude, and those were issues that were to do with me, likely to do with my race, not necessarily to do with the fact that I might have had a mental disability. And I was treated quite differently because of it. When I started to explain to people that I had anxiety disorder, people's sort of attitudes were like, they started to feel a bit bad about the fact that they had treated me so awkwardly. And I think it's very easy when someone does have they struggle with any kind of mental health issue, and they are a person of color, to segment them into a stereotype that makes sense to you. So that's the angry Black woman. That's the strange Black woman. That's the very quiet. And one of my best friends who's Indonesian, she has anxiety and depression. She is just a really quiet Asian girl. You know what I mean? It's just, it just becomes really easy to stereotype people without actually going into and trying to understand the person as an individual. And I think that is definitely often the case. And we have this issue around sort of intersectional disclosure, where if you don't disclose your disability, if it's not visible, people have a really hard time accepting the other pieces of you that play into it. And I think that's oftentimes when you see disability groups, LGBT groups as well, you often tend to find people of color sort of the quietest voices in the room, because you don't necessarily feel like you should be there, and it's the idea of whiteness, the idea of power, and then your own perceptions of being a person of color and feeling like you need to kind of quiet your voice in every space, and that sort of transcends in every place that you go. So yeah, that's kind of been my experience. One of my experience, I noted in this article that I wrote for HEE that when I was in a wheelchair some years ago and I had a hip replacement, I went to a restaurant with my friend in London, and the waiter sort of kind of just didn't talk to me. Just did, like, it was, she made the assumption I couldn't speak for some reason. I don't know, for myself. I have no idea why, you know why, but it's just, you know, the whole time she was speaking to my friend, asking what my order was, speaking to my friend. And then when I actually verbalized and said something, she got really defensive, you know, about it. And it was very much, you have an attitude, there's something wrong with you. And that's the sort of stuff that when you are a person of color, or you are a woman, or you are from an LGBT background, you can't tell if you're being discriminated against because you have a disability, because you're a person of color, because, you know, you have no idea. You're stuck with that internal dilemma, and it just makes you want to close up inside yourself and segment into your own circles of safety, you know? So I do think that feeling, no matter what race you are, when you do have a disability, it just makes you want to separate yourself and not want to put yourself out there for that kind of treatment.
That uncertainty of, is it because of this aspect of my identity, or this aspect, or this aspect, or this aspect, much to some people's shock or surprise, nobody really comes out, only a very few rare times, and says, I'm specifically being annoying to you or devaluing you because of this, a part of your identity. I think that's something that is quite an important aspect to understand when we talk about disclosure, when we talk about accessing help, is we have to appreciate that everyone isn't in the same position to be able to disclose, whether that's LGBT plus identity, ethnic minority identity, or even just being in an environment or family background who is able to talk about disability. So to round off our discussion today, I'd quite like to ask to the people that are listening, whether they are disabled students about to graduate, disabled graduates, or non-disabled students or graduates, or even just health professionals currently just listening to the resource, wondering who to share it with. If they could go away today or do something tomorrow, just one small thing or even a large thing that you think would help towards that inclusion pathway, what would for you that one thing be, or that one or two things be?
Well, what a question. So I want to sort of answer this in three ways for three different sort of audiences. So if you have a disability, I would say, don't be afraid to reach out and access resources that are available to you. That's sort of like the kind of like straightforward thing to do. The more challenging thing to do is start to challenge yourself a bit about how you perceive yourself. The internal struggle and the internal battle of dealing with a disability in society is something that is very much overlooked. I've personally been to therapy where I've been able to sort of work through some of my own challenges and my perceptions about myself as it relates to my disability. And that's been really helpful for me in terms of boosting my confidence. For people who do not have disabilities, I'm all for allyship. Please start your education. It's really simple. There's a lot of YouTube channels out there, a lot of podcasts, a lot of books that you can start to sort of read to sort of educate yourself on things. I'm sure a lot of organizations as well are starting to develop better guidance to support people managers and how they can better manage and support people that do have disabilities. So I would say start with education and work your way from there. And then more so to like the wider society, this is more for everyone. I think it would be actually a really good idea, if it doesn't exist already, for people with disabilities to form a mentoring program. I think if I had a mentor, someone who had a very similar lived experience to me when I was younger, to sort of support me in those challenges around my perceptions of myself, I think that would have really, really helped me. I have had mentors that have been great, but they weren't able to sort of touch on the issues with my perceptions of myself and being a person with disability, right? They were, just keep trying, don't worry about it. But they couldn't really fully understand what it was that I was going through. what I was experiencing externally and psychologically as well. So I would say if anything that we could do together would be to sort of form a mentoring group for younger people that have disabilities, because the reason that a lot of people with disabilities aren't entering the workforce, especially medical careers, particularly, is because a lot of people are not telling you that you should. You know, you're seen as someone who needs the treatment of medicine, not someone who should be supporting research, delivering and leading on research and leading on these conversations. And I think if we can sort of shift that and put people with disabilities back at the forefront of those conversations, at the forefront of leading medical research, at the forefront of being nurses and all those sorts of things, I think we will start to make more progress and in a quicker way. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I'd love to talk to you all day, but we've run out of time. So I just want to say a wonderful thank you for taking the time of your day to come and talk to us here for this resource. To our listeners, please do engage with this resource and read through it, watch the rest of the videos, and do apply for the support that you're entitled to: access to work, disabled students allowance, talk to your occupational health therapist or support worker or administrator, if those are the people relevant to you, and have that initial conversation, even if it's informally. And think about perceptions, think about how you want to see yourself, as Cherina has kindly spoken about today. So thank you so much, and we'll catch you another time.